Hey everybody, welcome to CAF Warbird Tube, the show where we talk about World War II, aviation, history, and so much more. Warbird Tube is produced by the Commemorative Air Force, the world's largest flying museum. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. The CAF began the Warbird movement more than 65 years ago, and thanks to the support of individuals like you, we continue to grow strong. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now our host, Steve Buss. Thanks for watching and keep 'em flying.
Good evening, aviation enthusiasts. Welcome to CAF Warbird Tube. Tonight, episode number 163, and we're going to explore the treasures that you'll find in the Air Corps Library and even more, so stick around. Now, whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a loyal Warbird Tube fan, we're thrilled to have you with us again tonight. If you enjoy our content, please spread it across all of your social media platforms. We would appreciate that very much. Warbird Tube is made possible by the Commemorative Air Force. You can find out more about the CAF, our events, our aircraft, where you can see the aircraft. A lot of them are on tour this summer, local units, or how you can join the fun. Just visit our website, commemorativeairforce.org. Well, if you've been around the Warbird community for any length of time, you've heard the name Air Corps, and they have been doing some great work. And joining us right now is Esther Aubie. And Esther, glad to have you with us and making time out of your busy schedule. You're actually overseas at the moment.
I am, yeah. Thanks, Steve. I'm always excited, though, to talk to a group of Warbird enthusiasts. It's one of my favorite things. So I love working with the CAF for that reason.
Oh, good. And I know you have Air Corps supported many of our units. And, I know from all of our volunteers, we appreciate your efforts as well. So it's always fascinating to find out how people become immersed in the Warbird community or aviation in general. What about you? What's your backstory? How did you get to be a part of Air Corps?
I guess random is the only word to describe it. I came in with absolutely no aviation background, which now, 8 or 9 years later, I think was a huge benefit to me. My background is in art conservation, and I have a specialty in books, so restoring and rebinding historical books. So obviously you can see kind of where the library element comes into it. And I heard about Air Corps through a friend and just wandered in and asked for a job. And at that point, there was no one managing the Air Corps library section of the business. It was just kind of when people had time in off hours. And so I started one day a week looking at microfilm, and then it turned into a part-time position, and then it went full-time. And so it was a bit of a, yeah, it didn't happen right away, but it's been incredible. I mean, who doesn't think airplanes are cool? So I've definitely gone down the rabbit hole with it, and at this point, I cannot imagine doing anything else.
What are some of the things that, coming from the, I don't want to say the outside world, but the non-aviation world, and coming into this and starting to discover the library, were there any things that sort of stood out to you when you started doing some of your research? Like, wow, I didn't know this existed.
I guess the big thing for me would be the organizational system that the military had for all of their documentation and that manufacturers had for their drawings. It's been incredibly fascinating for me. I get very nerdy about part numbering systems and the tech order system, which is essentially the military's version of the Dewey Decimal System. And the mere fact that during one of the most chaotic times in our history in America, we were not only manufacturing these incredible airplanes that we still love, but the organization of the documentation that supports them was also incredibly organized, which is just fantastic and was not something that I expected at all. So.
Let's talk a little bit about Air Corps itself. As you mentioned the library, but there's more to it than just the documents, right?
Yeah, definitely. People are always surprised. We're sort of a one-stop shop, and a lot of people only know us for one specific sector of our business. So the glamorous part, of course, is the aircraft restoration. That's what people are mostly interested in. it's definitely what keeps the lights on. And obviously, we specialize specifically in World War II restorations. And we have an entire fabrication shop that's not quite as big as restoration, but almost. It's in its own separate facility. So we fabricate parts for our restorations, and we also fabricate parts for newer aircraft as well. So they have a lot on their plate. And then we do part sales, which is another part of the business called Air Corps Depot. And was it last year? Yeah, last spring we bought Pioneer Aero Services, which was the world's largest inventory of P-51 parts. Just last week we bought Dusters and Sprayers, which is a huge Stearman inventory of parts. So we have a whole set of the business where people buy and sell parts, and that's all online. We have Air Corps Art, which is historically accurate placards, decals, stencils, paint masks, all of that. And obviously that serves our restoration as well, but there's a whole website where you can order and purchase things that are specific to your aircraft. And then we have the most boring part of our business for most people, which is library, what I do, which is the engineering drawings and technical manuals.
Yeah. Well, and we'll get into this a little later on, but I've been involved in a couple of restorations, and having to go to microfiche, which is a foreign term to many people, to look up drawings and to try and interpret those sorts of things. So when we dive into the library itself, I think people will be very interested in exactly what's all in the library and what's available. But as you said, restoration is kind of the glamorous part. Some great restorations have come out of Air Corps. This one, of course, the P-47 Bonnie. I mean, what a beautiful airplane.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very biased about the restoration work that we do, but yeah, I mean, Bonnie has been an incredible project. It was in the shop when I started at Air Corps. It wasn't our main project at that point, but we were finishing Loeb's Hope III when I started. And to see the P-47 go from what it was in 2011 when it came into the shop to last summer when it flew it's always a very emotional experience to see an airplane fly for the first time. Yeah, this is 2011 when the P-47 came in, and it came from New Guinea. And it had kind of an interesting history there of being in the jungle, obviously, for many years, and people pulling parts off of it. And I mean, I guess in many senses, even though this is obviously a wreck, it's in pretty decent condition, all things considered, and everything that happened to it. And it was really great, obviously, to have this airframe in this state and be able to take it apart and understand how things went together. We've done quite a few Mustang restorations, but the P-47 is so much more complex than a Mustang. It was really great to have that. And yeah, it's obviously been a long road. I like the picture there on the left because it gives you an idea of the scale with the guys putting on the flaps there. It's such a huge airplane for a fighter. It's really impressive. And then the picture on the bottom right, I personally like because I helped install those oxygen bottle brackets. Yeah, but Air Corps, one of our things is we like to take everything to the nth degree. So our restorations sometimes take a little bit longer, but every element we're concerned with, historical accuracy to the best of our abilities. And obviously the engineering drawings come into play there too. That's a picture out at our hangar with some of the other airplanes we were working on. That was when Bonnie was finished. And then the picture down below obviously I think that was when we had mounted our test engine on to test the QEC functions. Yeah.
Well, it's amazing. You mentioned that, you've done P-51 restorations. Those have been done for many, many years, right? So there's sort of a blueprint. There's always somebody to go to who's done it before. P-47 is a little different because there's very few that have been restored at all. And I know our Air Base Georgia team is working on it, and they've had some updates on that. And just the enormity of, like you mentioned, the enormity of the airplane itself. You you don't realize how big it is and complicated.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and Bonnie is a unique P-47 in the world. I mean, it's a D-23, so it's a Razorback P-47, and there are, I believe, 2 other Razorback P-47s flying, but they are Curtiss built, and this is the only Republic manufactured P-47 in existence. So there's, every restoration has its difficulties and things you have to figure out. And I'll say that no one was happier to see the P-47 fly away than we were. It's very exciting, and yeah.
Yeah, mixed emotions. I can imagine to see it actually flying away, being completed, and you kind of feel, it's like, oh, the baby bird is leaving the nest, but at the same time, it's like, I can imagine it was like, wow, that was a major project. I'm glad that's done, right? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, definitely. And now, I mean, we do such a large amount of documentation and kind of project management stuff that it's nice to see it come full circle. And then we can do things like help Air Base Georgia, with that restoration. And we have some, hints and knowledge to provide. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And one of the other absolutely outstanding aircraft that appeared at Oshkosh last year is Thunderbird. I mean, you can't, unless you saw it up close. Pictures do not do the paint justice. And to be standing next to it last summer and actually still smelling the fresh paint coming off of it was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, there's honestly, I feel a little bad. I mean, we finished the P-47, and then I think it was maybe 4 weeks later we finished Thunderbird, and it was such a whirlwind, right? I mean, Thunderbird came back from paint and then flew to Oshkosh like the next day, but there's something truly magical about this airplane, and it is hard to describe. It was so incredible to be at Oshkosh, and you could see people's faces when they saw the airplane, and they would see it from across the runway, and their eyes would get big, and they would just be like, what is that? And they would come kind of running over. And I feel like there's not very many Mustangs that can say that. I mean, it's such a popular airplane. And to have one that's not in like a military scheme and have this completely different but incredibly fascinating history has been really just a fun project to work on. And these are some pictures of when we got it. So this is a very long-term project. They came to us kind of in this state, so it wasn't a ground-up restoration for us. And that's why it didn't take us quite as long to finish. But it is also the lifelong dream of Warren Peace to own a Mustang, and having this specific airframe, and having the Jimmy Stewart and Jackie Cochran connection, and being a Bendix Trophy winner. Yeah. Here we go. So yeah, bottom left is Jimmy Stewart is on the right. Joe DeBona is on the left. They won the Bendix Trophy in 1949 in Thunderbird, and I like that picture because it shows all the things they stripped out of the airplane to save weight, which is great. And then, of course, Jackie Cochran set several speed records in Thunderbird over the years. And one of our favorite stories was the selling back and forth of Thunderbird. So Jimmy Stewart sold Thunderbird, he sold Thunderbird to Jackie Cochran for $1 and, quote, other considerations. And then later, after she won her speed records, then she sold it back to him for $1 and other considerations. But I mean, the story goes on and on. I mean, the airplane was involved in Queen Elizabeth's coronation and transporting the film from England back to the States and broadcasting it. I mean, it's definitely got a star-studded past, but we're really glad that Warren obviously decided to paint it in the scheme of Thunderbird, because nothing can beat that cobalt blue. It's just, it's fantastic. Yeah, I took that picture at Oshkosh. It was one of my favorite pictures that I took. It's just such a, I mean, like I said, it felt a little bit unfair to the P-47 because, I mean, we were all so excited for Thunderbird. And I remember when it flew back from paint, they came and they did a couple of circles over the shop and everybody just ran outside. And yeah, I mean, it's such a special airplane. So
indeed. So what we're here to talk about tonight. I mean, aside from airplanes, which is always great, but this is as you mentioned before, this is your passion. This is something that you've really latched onto, and you just tell when you talk about it the excitement in your voice and being able to get into this kind of research.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's very nerdy, but I always appreciate the behind the scenes stuff, and there's nothing more behind the scenes than engineering data and technical manuals. People don't, when you look at an airplane like Bonny or Thunderbird or any warbird, this isn't what comes to mind unless you're probably an engineer by trade, and then maybe you would think about it. But the hard fact is that we wouldn't have any of these airplanes that we love so much without all of the engineering drawings and the manuals that were used to build them and maintain them and operate them. So it's such an important piece of the puzzle, even though it can get a little bit dry at times. And I think that's part of why I get so excited about it. And obviously the Air Corps Library site was born to preserve all of that historical data, but also make it available, like you were talking about microfiche, right? Making it available online in a way that was easy to access, and also that the younger generation was willing to interface with. Asking a 20-year-old to sit down at a microfilm reader and look for an engineering drawing is probably going to deter them pretty quickly from continuing in the vintage area. And so that's been a really big part of what we do. And that's why the motto there of preserve and serve is kind of what I encapsulate the library site is doing, preserving the information and using it to serve the entire warbird community and the work that we're doing. Yeah, so when we first started the website it was at the end of 2015 was when it launched. The concern was, how do we get enough information to make this a viable resource for people to actually use? And it was the opposite of what we had thought. Literally, the floodgates opened and people from all over the world were reaching out and wanting to donate materials. And the thing that I hear over and over again from these people is that they're really excited that their information is not going into, a museum basement or somewhere where nobody's ever going to see it again. It's actually getting pushed out there to the people who need it the most. And it's getting used for its intended purpose, which is huge. I mean, I've worked in plenty of museums, and one of the problems is that those archives kind of get relegated for academic use. And to me, there is nothing cooler than being in the preservation side of things and have people use that data for its intended purpose and build airplanes, which is it's just fantastic. And so obviously we've grown a ton. We've got 500,000 engineering drawings on the site at this point, and over 18,000 technical manuals, and we have thousands and thousands more that are getting digitized literally every day. Our goal is to add about 40 new manuals to the site on a daily basis, which we usually get pretty close to. So there's a ton of data out there.
Well, and that's a nice point that you just kind of made that I want to clarify on, is that it's not just what's in the Air Corps library itself, but what people are now donating, right, to you, because they see this as a great repository to not only, as you said, preserve it, but also to share it with the world. And amazing, using technology to be able to do that, something that even 10, 15 years ago would have been almost impossible to scan all those manuals, digitize, and get them done. How do you do that? How do you break those manuals down to get them online?
I mean, we have several different types of scanners depending on what type of material we get. I mean, most of the the old manuals from World War II would come in like the Air Force style binders. It's just like a 3-post, and it's really easy to just pop them out, and you make sure none of the pages are stuck together, and then you just run it through. We have a high speed, high volume scanner for that, and we also have flatbed scanners for larger images, and I have a large format scanner if we have like actual paper engineering drawings, things for really big items, and then I have a cradle scanner for items that can't be taken apart, like bound books and things of that nature. So it's really about the material itself. And one of my goals when we scan things is that if we're returning an item to its owner, which we a lot of the times do, because we don't have the space to keep a lot of these massive donations that we're scanning, is I want people to receive their items back, not being able to tell that we did anything to them.
Right.
And that's my art conservation background coming into play. Respecting the objects and not doing any damage of that nature.
Excellent.
Yeah, I hope I clarified enough like what the website actually is. I should say that it's available to anybody who wants to sign up for a membership. We have a lot of model builders who use the site, and just general like nerdy technical people who love looking at engineering data in their spare time. So it's a very interesting cross-section of people that use the site. But yeah. But the Ken Jungeberg collection, I like to tell because it's a little less dry than just looking at engineering drawings by themselves because of the incredible story that goes along with it. So Ken Jungeberg was a gentleman who worked at North American Aviation from 1969 to 1988, right when Rockwell International purchased North American. And he was an engineer and a draftsman in those early days. Ken is the one in the upper left in the light colored suit. He's receiving an award there from his supervisor for 0 defects in his engineering work. So Ken was a World War II enthusiast. B-25 is his favorite airplane. And so obviously he was excited to end up at North American working because of their legacy. And he worked at the Columbus, Ohio facility. And that photo there on the right is a photo of what they called the vault in Columbus. It was where they kept all of the engineering drawings. And this is only a photo of one room. There were many, many rooms. And for some reason, Ken and I have hypothesized about this with no real answer. But post-war, Columbus had become it had become kind of a hub for all of the engineering data that was happening or that was created during World War II. So Inglewood, Kansas City, Dallas, they were all shipping their engineering archives to Columbus and sort of became this one big repository of essentially the history of North American aircraft from World War II. And in 1988, the Columbus facility was closing because they had finished the work that they were working the B-1 at that point. And Ken heard a rumor that they were planning on burning their entire collection of what they called non-current engineering drawings that were in the vault. And Ken knew that included essentially everything from World War II. And he knew that was wrong. And he reached out to several of his superiors and said, I'm willing to take this information at no cost to the company. I'd be happy to become its caretaker. And they completely dismissed him. And then several weeks later, maybe a month, they had been throwing all of the drawings that they were planning on burning into these rooms in preparation, and a pipe burst in the room where they were storing the majority of this stuff, and it literally filled up with water. The picture there on the left is the room. You can see there's dirt. The foundation, that block wall there, is cracked from the water. And so at this point, they couldn't burn them because they were completely soaked. And the picture on the left there is, you can see there's a heap of drawings that they just piled up on the factory floor. They pulled out of that room. And they let them sit there for about 2 weeks in that state. And then eventually someone reached out to Ken and said, you're the only person that really expressed any interest in this information. So if you are still interested in taking it, then you need to come and get it today. And their only caveat was that they didn't want him to ever throw it in a landfill or have the drawings, kind of blowing around where someone might be able to find them. They didn't want to sully the name of the company in that way. And so he rented a truck and got a friend to help, and he went and they loaded everything up, and you can see there's some wooden crates in that picture also. So he took everything that was wet, and they also said, you know what, just take this other stuff too. So there was also some things that weren't part of the flood that he took. And so he took them to a friend's barn. And I'm so glad his wife Betty took these photos. So this is him in 1988, Ken, going through this massive collection of drawings, laying things out to dry, re-rolling them, kind of organizing them at a high level. And this project took him, I think it was maybe 6 weeks, he said, to kind of get through things. And he was putting things either back in the crates or in cardboard boxes and just kind of, getting everything organized. And the fantastic thing about the material, this tracing vellum that the drawings were done on, because they were done in pencil, the flood didn't really affect, it didn't wash off any of the drawings like they would have been if they were done in ink. And so other than being a little bit dirty, or in some cases more dirty, the drawings themselves actually retained their information in a pretty incredible way. So I heard about Ken. Someone told me about him, a mutual contact at the Tri-State Warbird Museum in Batavia, Ohio. And I reached out, and I got really excited, one, because Ken obviously had worked at North American, and he was also very interested in part numbering systems and some of the things that very specific things that I was also interested in. And so we talked for a couple of hours, and then I had asked him to send me some sample drawings, because a lot of people, they say, oh, I have this amazing thing, and then you get it, and it's something you've seen a lot. And so I was just, when somebody says original drawings, it can mean several different things. And so he sent me 14 drawings initially, and I'm not sure what the next slide is. Did I put a picture in there of it? Of like a, yeah.
You have the microfilm?
Yes, this is exactly. So this drawing is for the P-51D throttle quadrant. It's the latest revision drawing for this assembly. And the image on the left from microfilm it's obviously not the best version of this drawing that we have, but it's important because it's the latest revision. So we have earlier revisions that are nicer quality from microfilm, but this is the latest revision drawing. And obviously you can see that there's many problems with this drawing. Microfilm is a very unstable media. And this is just what happens to it as it ages. And so it just so happened that one of the 14 drawings that Ken sent me initially was this actual drawing, and that's what's there on the right. And full disclosure, I got a little bit emotional when I opened it. I'd never seen an original drawing before, in pencil, and I knew what the quality was of the version that we had on microfilm. And obviously you can read every detail, you can see smudge marks of the pencil, you can see where people have erased little details as it was revised over time. And at that point, I knew that what Ken had was something just amazing. And so several weeks later, myself and our general manager at Air Corps, Eric Kokoff, we flew to Ohio to see Ken and kind of see things in person that he had. And so he had a lot of drawings at his house and also at his hangar. And the image there on the left is me and Ken looking at the tail gun installation drawing for the B-25 that's in his basement. He, being a B-25 enthusiast, first and foremost, he had a lot of the very fun and interesting drawings for the B-25 just in the house. They had a ping pong table downstairs, and there was just these plastic totes of B-25 drawings under the ping pong table. And so we pulled stuff out, and Ken is a very typical engineer, right? Never very organized, doesn't want to throw anything away for historical purposes. He had some amazing stuff down there, like pencils with the North American logo stamped on them, just like everything we opened. We were just, kind of dumbfounded by what he had. And obviously the drawings were just incredible. And you see on the top there that picture of those wooden crates that were the same ones from that black and white photo. And then the bottom right image is just a fun one. It's the perspective view of the engine installation in the Mustang. And so when we were at Ken's hangar, which we actually stopped at first, we wanted to open a box or a crate that Ken had never opened before. And of course, being an engineer, he pulled out his spreadsheet and went down the list of all the inventory that he'd taken and the date that he'd opened. And so we chose a box off of that list kind of at random that he'd never opened. And I think it might be the next slide. Like the third drawing that we pulled out of that box was an exploded view of the P-51D, and this drawing. And I remember Eric and I just kind of looking at each other like, what do you say at that point? There's not really very much that words could convey in that situation. It was just completely amazing. And talk about a treasure trove, right? Like an experience that probably only happens once in a lifetime if you're lucky. And that was definitely kind of how we felt when we were there with Ken. And so we spent like the next year sort of going back and forth about what to do with it, and kind of talking with Ken about his goals. And what he really wanted was to be able to share the collection with as many people as possible. And his initial plan was to maybe sell the drawings off one by one to kind of get it out there to a broad community. And over the course of the year, I convinced Ken that keeping them together as a collection was going to be more meaningful. And I was obviously very excited to be like the new caretaker of this collection and continue Ken's legacy, because he kept them in his house and in his hangar for 31 years, just at his own expense, and being a very humble person, like most engineers are, was very kind of blasé, like, I did this thing, but nobody probably really cares about it. And obviously that hasn't been the case. And we were very curious to see how the rest of the Warbird community would react. I mean, we know how we reacted, but we unveiled the collection at NWOC in 2020. Yeah, February of 2020, right before COVID. Mm-hmm. And it was down in Mobile. And I brought, I think, maybe 6 drawings, this one included. And I changed them twice. So it showed 2 drawings per day, one in the afternoon and one in the morning. And it was really great because people were just as excited as we were. I mean, people were just like, oh my God, like, what is this? And so that was really awesome to see that other people were really excited. And the amazing thing about this collection is that it's not just production drawings, like the things that we see on microfilm, like that latest revision throttle quadrant. It's got a bunch of experimental data, things that were never released before. For those of us that read drawings for a living, there's always, that note on there, see drawing, whatever, and then you look for it and it's not there. And a lot of that stuff, my guess is that it's in this collection. So I've only cataloged the Mustang stuff at this point, and there's a lot more in there to do. So we've already been able to answer some questions that have kind of stumped us for quite some time in our restorations.
Well, this is quite an extensive collection of documents, drawings, and everything. And how did you get it all in one spot to start sharing it with everybody?
Yeah, so it was just before Christmas, 2019. Yes. Eric Hokup and I, our general manager, we flew out to see Ken the second time and loaded up everything into a 26-foot Penske truck and drove it back to the shop in Bemidji. And it was great because the 18-hour drive gave us time to talk about, the ins and outs, what we wanted to do with the collection, how I was going to get started organizing it, and all of that. And this video here is a time-lapse video of me getting started organizing the drawings. So essentially what I did, well, first we had to rent a building to store all of this information in because there was so much. And if anybody's ever been to a restoration shop, you know that space is always at a premium. And I knew that even in the space we had, there was nowhere where I was going to have enough room to really lay things out and have it be clean and not get damaged. And so we got this building out of the fairgrounds, and it went from an empty building to just exploded. There were drawings everywhere. Basically, I was taking out every single drawing out of the boxes, and a lot of them were rolled, bunches of drawings rolled together, and looking at every single one, looking at the part number and sorting them into piles by their part number prefix, which tells you the model of the aircraft that drawing was originally designed for, even if it was used interchangeably later on other North American aircraft, which they did a lot of times, especially for individual parts. And so I sorted drawings, every single drawing by part number prefix, and then I took those piles and I sorted those piles by size, because there's 5 standard size drawings. We call them cut size. So there's A, B, C, D, and G for North American. And then the roll size, things are huge and long. And then once that was done, I sorted each pile of size drawings in numerical order by its part number suffix, which groups it into different systems and various level of specifics after that. And then once that was done, I found a cataloging program and was using that to add pertinent details. Part number description is really important on these drawings because, as I mentioned, a lot of them are experimental, so you're not going to find a description in a parts catalog or any other location for it. So that's critical. And then the date it was drawn, the material that it was drawn on, the factory that came out of, and then for me, most importantly, the draftsman who drew it. And so here is just a couple photos of that process. On the left there we've been slowly acquiring flat file cabinets to store these cut size drawings in. We only need about 50 more of them. But every drawer has a location, and so with the cataloging system, it's really great because you can search a part number and say, oh, it's perfect, it's in this drawer, and then everything is in numerical order, and you can really quickly find what you need. But one of the things that was really incredible and unexpected, so Ken thought initially that there had been around 15,000 drawings that had been in the flood, and once I got cataloging, I realized that number was only like a small fraction of what was actually there. So my estimate is that there's probably about 50,000 drawings in this collection, because after getting started, I've already cataloged over 15,000 just of the cut size Mustang drawings, not including any of the larger roll size stuff. And I mean, we have probably way more drawings for the B-25. We've got a bunch of T6, both World War II era T6 and then early variations, the BT-9 and stuff from the mid-30s. There is a bunch of twin Mustang drawings. There's some T-28. So, I mean, there's a huge, huge amount of stuff, and it's definitely turned into a much bigger job maybe even than I suspected. But one of the amazing things that working with this stuff has brought to light for me personally, one, it's a very humbling experience because I'm actually the first non-North American employee to ever see this information and touch these pieces of paper, which is pretty crazy. I don't really know how else to describe it. It's really amazing, but because it's pencil, right? There's that element of connection with the draftsman. Someone sat down at a table, they touched that piece of paper. It's not a computer generated image, right? There's something very personal about that. And because of that, I've really become interested in the story of who these draftsmen were and using the drawings to tell that story. And my main goal, well, I'd really like to write a book about it. That's kind of my first and foremost, because in truth, the draftsmen are a completely almost forgotten about sector of people who contributed to the war effort. Obviously, they were unenlisted, they were stateside, but the fact is that without the work that they did, we would have none of the airplanes that we have today. And I mean, a lot of times we talk about pilots, which is great. We talk about Rosie the Riveters, which is great. But there were thousands of these people who sat at a desk during the war, and they were doing this incredibly, incredibly important work. And they were, as a whole, clearly a very humble group of people. They weren't boastful about their contributions. And as we'll see on the next slide, we don't have to switch yet, but I think a lot of them felt very guilty about not serving an active duty. And that's part of the story that I would like to tell, is to champion their contribution and their achievements. And obviously, even though most of them have probably passed on, to tell their story and really see the glory in what they did. And so Fred Prill, the guy on the left there, he was the first draftsman that I actually found a family member for. So his story was crazy because he was part of the initial design team for the prototype Mustang. If you know the story, they chose a very small team of people to work on that design, and they essentially ate and slept at the factory. His son said he didn't really see him during that time period. But we have, I don't know, maybe so far I found maybe 20 or 30 of Fred's drawings in the collection. And I was able to find him originally because he's got, Prill is a very unique last name. And most of the time, draftsmen only sign their last name on a drawing, which makes it very difficult to locate them. And it so happened that I stumbled upon a photograph of the engineering department at North American from 1938, and it had everybody's name listed. And that was kind of like the Rosetta Stone for me to get started locating these guys. And yeah, so Fred was the first guy that I found, just a really neat connection of him being like on that like groundbreaking team of people. He worked for North American for his entire career. And then Clyde was the second guy that I found, and the drawing that it's a little bit smaller. It's hard to see. It's the brake pedal. It was actually interestingly used on all of North American's aircraft. Same design. So T6, T28, B-25, P-51. Clyde designed that pedal, and North American used it for everything. And I was able to locate his son and daughter. And his daughter still lives in California. I think his son lives somewhere in the South. But Clyde had created a scrapbook of his time at North American, and they sent it to me. And that's where this photo came from. It was his 10-year anniversary, same as Fred. He worked for North American his entire career. And it was, I mean, the things that he had in that scrapbook were crazy. His identification badges from the factory. He had photos of himself in the factory testing different components like the B-25 gun installation. He worked on that as well. And these are just great examples of how those drawings there are very technical and can be very dry, but when you see the picture of the person who created the drawing next to it, it really brings it to life, and it has just a completely new meaning to it. And so I've written a couple blog posts, one about each of them. And so I like to think, as a pilot, like now anytime you get in your airplane, if you're flying a Mustang, like you're putting your feet on a part that Clyde designed, right? There's a person behind that part.
As you're looking at the drawings, I mean, they're all technical drawings, so they have to, there's no room for artistic expression. But is there a difference? Can you tell the difference between maybe a drawing that Fred did versus Clyde?
So most of them are very standardized, but there are actually a few areas on a drawing where there is a little bit of artistic expression that comes into it, and one of it is the signature block. So Clyde, for example, was very straightforward. He signed his name in draftsman style print, right? Just Maulding is the last name. But Fred had a very specific signature that was really nice. And the way that he signed the drawing was very unique. And that was one of the things that caught my eye initially when I was looking at his drawings. But there's also a heat treat box on the drawings that obviously is only filled in if it's an individual part, because you wouldn't be heat treating like components, in bulk. And if there was no heat treat required, so for a component level drawing and above, they had to indicate that was, that box was empty. And everybody had their own way of doing that. Some people would just put a diagonal line. Some people had little patterns that they would draw. And so that's that's definitely one of the areas. And some people, you can tell, their handwriting is not quite as good as somebody else's, or yeah. But I mean, for the most part, they were very, very standard. I mean, they had, rules and guidelines about what they could and could not do. But it is interesting to, see some of the slight variations that they threw in there. Yeah. And so this was very exciting for me. This just happened last summer, just right before Oshkosh. I located the family of Vernon Gavick, and this was the first family member that I actually got to meet in person of a draftsman. And so that photo there on the left is, I think it's an H model, P51 H model drawing from 1944. And that photo of Vernon that's sitting on top of it was taken like 4 months after the drawing was done. So it was like right in the same time period. And then the photo on the right is Janet. She's the one on the left there. That was Vern's wife. She's 94. And then one of his children there on the left or on the right. And they're in Hudson, Wisconsin, just across the river. From St. Paul. And so I went and I got to spend the day or the afternoon chatting with him, and I brought some of Vern's drawings to show them, and we just got to sit down and talk about who he was as a person. And he didn't work, interestingly, for North American for a really long time. He was out in California, moved home because his mother had passed away and his father was sick, but he still had they had saved like newspaper clippings that he had sent home, and they just had this amazing collection of stuff about his life and who he was. And he continued to be an engineer and then eventually became an architect. But that was kind of talking with Janet, his wife. We talked a bit about that guilt of not serving. So Vern's younger brother joined the Navy and served in World War II, and they had a letter there that he had written home to his parents, who were very, scared and they felt some animosity maybe about him joining the Navy. And Vern had just this amazing thing to say about, like, he's going to be fine and you can't baby him and he knows what he's getting into and it's really important, and a very poignant letter. And Janet did say, that he did feel a little bit of guilt for staying home and not being an active part of the war effort. And like I said, I imagine that is a feeling that a decent amount of those guys felt. And obviously some of them were drafted during their time working at those companies. But it was still, the work was so important and their contribution was so huge that, again, my goal is to tell their story and champion their achievements and, kind of bring that contribution to light, which is why I would like to write this book, and also why I recently installed this exhibit at the EAA Museum. I guess it would have been last spring. And the exhibit is called, what is it called?
Drafting, the art of aircraft engineering in World War II.
That's it. Yeah, so when we got the drawings from Ken, that was one of the things that I told him that I really wanted to do, because there is some copyright considerations to be taken into account because they're original drawings. And so I knew that we weren't just going to be able to throw them on the Air Corps Library website and just, do that right away. And so I brought up the idea of doing a museum exhibit that could travel around and be seen by a lot of people. And so I spent a couple of years working on this and finally got it installed in the spring at EAA. And that's essentially the goal of the exhibit, is one, to educate obviously younger people who probably have no idea what a draftsman actually is. So educating people on the history of essentially what is CAD now, the tools that they were using to do their jobs, the purpose of it and how we use them today, and then obviously telling Ken's story. And so I cherry picked some of the really great drawings from Ken's collection to use to tell this story, and then did a couple of bios on people like Fred Prill and Clyde, to kind of bring that human element into it. But yeah, it's going to be on display through September of next year, 2025, and it's in the Eagle Hangar at the EAA Museum, which, makes sense, I suppose. But yeah, it was kind of the culmination for me of a lot of things, and it was really fun to work on because, again, it's just engineering is such a fascinating thing, because my goal is that people would leave the exhibit and kind of look at the world a little bit differently. I mean, engineers do look at the world in a very specific way, but as a general person, you don't think about how every single thing that you touch or interact with every day, unless it's something organic in nature, was designed by an engineer, and someone put a lot of thought into it. And I think that's a really important piece to kind of, tell these kind of forgotten heroes their side of the story.
That is a fascinating element of this. And when we first started talking about the Air Corps Library, I knew about the drawings and everything. But then as you're talking about the drawings, and obviously very passionate about it, but you have also drawn out more than just the drawings. Obviously, the stories of these designers, and just touching on the fact that they may have had some remorse for not serving the front lines, but yet, if you could bring them out 50, 75 years, whatever, and say, yeah, you may not have been in Europe or in the Pacific, but look at the brake pedal, for instance, and how many airplanes that went into it, how many pilots were trained in T6s with those brake pedals, or Mustangs in combat, and the huge impact that they had. They may not have, like I said, they weren't on the front lines in the infantry, but they were a huge contribution to the war effort that we just couldn't do it without.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And I do think it speaks to the general personality of the engineers as a group, that they were very, engineers, they're all kind of the same person. I like to call them self-deprecating introverts.
I like that.
Yeah, they really do like to downplay their achievements, and like Ken, I saved these drawings, but I don't really think it's a big deal. Yeah, that was another one of my goals with this exhibit specifically, was to say, Ken, this is a huge deal. You have effectively changed the course of maybe how people are going to do their work going forward. And I mean, we've had people come to the shop. I mean, because we can't just right now largely distribute this information, we're still encouraging people come to the shop. If you have a specific project, do some research. The guys at the B-25 History Project out of Kansas City have come up to do research about their 8-gun nose installation that they're working on. Drawings that, again, are not on microfilm, but are in that collection. We pulled a bunch of stuff for them to help them do their work. And I mean, who knows what we're going to find? I mean, once the collection is fully cataloged, there's so many unanswered questions that are available to answer. I mean, I found the tail hook drawings, the tail hook modification for the B-25, for the Mustang. Those are in there. And I mean, that's just kind of off the top of my head. There's got to be so much more. So there's a great single tail modification for the B-25 drawing in there.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how long it's going to take to catalog all of it and scan it all? This is job security for you, right?
Right. I mean, unfortunately, I have all these other things to do with the website, right? And in truth, I'd probably rather be working on Ken's collection 24/7, but it is kind of slow going. And what we'd really like to do at Air Corps is to build a specific facility to house this stuff in, so it's on site, it's not out at the location where it is now, so that it's close by and we can access it. But I mean, who knows, maybe in the next couple of years we'll be able to get that taken care of. And obviously the consideration is, I mean, we need the flat files, but we've also designed kind of a lattice system for like archival tubes where you can store the roll drawings. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure it'll be years in the making. We could probably come back in 20 years before I'm ready to retire and we could do another interview and we could talk about my progress.
And talk about all the other interesting things that you found in the drawings.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just want to back up for a second here to you mentioned the heat treat, the heat treatment box, and I just saw this on Vernon's, and I never would have known this at all, but he just had kind of a little squiggle in the heat treat box. So that was his way of saying, no, don't need it.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I actually wrote a blog post. Maybe it was an email. I sent out a weekly email about new things that get added to the site and what have you. And one week I focused on that and I took screenshots of, some of the fun ones that I'd found, maybe like 15 or so different heat treat boxes. And yeah, it's just a fascinating little element there. And I mean, sometimes the artistic stuff really does come in. I mean, people so the guy who did, the exploded view drawing that we pulled out when we were at Ken's, that the guy who drew that, his name was Eugene Clay. And he also worked for North American for kind of a short period of time, but he was an artist and that was his specialty, to do those perspective kind of exploded view drawings that are really just artwork in themselves. Where was I going with that? I was going somewhere.
Well, and you mentioned it's almost, the exploded view is almost artwork in itself. And you're right. When you look at that, I mean, yeah, that's a Mustang. I see all the pieces and the gear doors and everything. But when you look at how it's presented and how it's, how it was drawn, it is artwork, even though it's very precise.
Right. I call it technical artistry. That's the term, and that's something that's so amazing about draftsmen, is that most of us are left or right-brained people, right? And they were both. They had the technical skill to understand the inner workings of an airplane and the artistic ability to convey it in a way that people would understand and that we would find beautiful later, which is, I mean, I don't really feel like that's a skill that anybody possesses anymore, because we don't have to do this work, right? The computer does it for us. It's very non-personal, and yeah, it's definitely kind of a lost art, even though there's plenty of people still around who learned, how to work on a drafting board and then kind of went to CAD. And actually that was Ken. He started as a draftsman and then he moved into the master dimensions department, even more specific, defining the outside contours of the airplane. While he was one of the first 2 people at the Columbus facility to learn how to use CAD, he went to Inglewood and was in a CAD training program there, and then came back to Ohio to teach the other people in the drafting department how to use CAD in like the 70s. And he has some really funny stories about the computers that they were using back then, and how you could really only make it do like a circle or a square before the computer crashed. And he kind of took that and ran with it. Yeah. And then moved into the master dimensions area, and just pretty incredible, but obviously never forgot his roots and never lost that appreciation for these guys who had come before him and did this amazing work.
So before we wrap up tonight, where can folks find your email post or blog post and, access the library?
Sure, yeah. So it's a very easy website, www.aircorpslibrary.com. And yeah, my blog is associated with that. We have two areas of the website. We have our membership side, which is the paid subscription. It's $9 a month or $75 a year. And that gets people access to everything that we have, pretty much. And then we have a non-member storefront where if people are just looking for one specific manual and they know exactly what they need, they can just go there and buy the download of it and not have to worry about the membership side. But if people want to look at the drawings, the engineering drawings we have, they have to become a member. That's a perk of membership. But yeah, all the blogs are on there. Some of them are on our regular aircorpsaviation.com site as well. But yeah, really, if you type in draftsman or World War II draftsman into Google, you're probably going to get the result because there's not very many people writing about it except for me.
Well, good.
Yeah,
I'm glad you are writing about it. It's a fascinating piece of history that, as you mentioned, kind of gets overlooked.
Yeah, for sure. It's been incredibly fun and very, very eye-opening, for sure.
Can you let us in on any projects that are underway in restoration now, or is it still under wraps?
No, I mean, we're working on, we've got two P-38 projects that we're working on currently, one that's in early stages and one that's kind of in late stages. We'll see if the late stage one makes it to Oshkosh this year, and that's the plan. And that one is in conjunction with Azell Aviation, down in Texas, and we've been kind of assisting with that. And we've got our ongoing AT-10, Beechcraft AT-10 project that's been in the shop for a long time, which is kind of a slow going. It's the wood frame nature of that project. It's a little outside of our wheelhouse, but that's a very interesting project. So that's continuing on. What else do we have? Well, during our Pioneer acquisition, they, as you may know, had all of the data for the TF-51 conversion. And so we've been working with that. I digitized the drawings that came along with that, and we're working towards creating a system to be able to do that modification for people, which is really exciting. TFs are cool. There should be more of them because we need to train more people to fly the Mustang. So,
there you go. All right. Well, we'll look for those restorations coming out of the shop. And again, thank you for spending some time with us tonight and sharing your absolute passion for this. And I know you used the term kind of geeking out or nerding or whatever, but it's absolutely fascinating. The more you get into learning about histories, and especially World War II history that we're focused on, but the intricacies that you just uncover as you just keep digging and digging and digging. And again, so pleased to meet you and continue on with your great work.
Yeah, thanks. No, this is really fun. Like I said, I always love to talk about this stuff.
Good. Well, for those of you in the audience, thank you for joining us tonight. We'd like to hear your thoughts on this episode or any ideas you have for future topics. Feel free to just drop us a line at media@cafhq.org. If you liked what you saw tonight, please share it across your social media platforms. And remember, if you are a subscriber on YouTube, click that bell icon. You'll get notifications when new episodes of Warbird Tube are posted. Until next time, I'm Steve Buss, wishing you blue skies and tailwinds. Have a great night.